My name is Esly Carvalho. I'm a clinical psychologist. I presently live in Brazil, although I've lived in several other countries, and I was raised in Texas, and it does show once in a while. And I am delighted today to have the opportunity and privilege to interview Sandra Paulsen, who's going to tell us a little bit about herself and her books, as well as the 3 workshops she's taught. She has taught one of these in Brazil, and she's coming back to teach some more. And I just was so delighted and fascinated by all I learned with her first workshop that I really feel that it's important to get the word out about teaching other EMDR clinicians about this, and not just in Brazil. So Sandra, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, and about these workshops you've been teaching.
Well, so nice to see you again, Esly, and I'm really happy that we have this chance to share some information about these important subjects. I'm a clinical psychologist. I do my clinical practice is intensive work on Bainbridge Island, where I see people for 3 days at a time usually, and then they fly home. But in addition to my clinical work, repairing attachment injuries and working with complex trauma, I do a lot of teaching and publishing, and I have for 25 years. And that started when I found that EMDR itself, although magnificent, and I can't imagine practicing without EMDR, that with some of the more complex cases, it wasn't as simple as we'd hoped. And so I became very interested in how to work with complex cases and dissociation. And I developed some protocols for using ego state therapy to work with complex cases. And that was my first book, Looking Through the Eyes of Trauma and Dissociation, 2009. And there's a workshop that goes with that. Additionally, our colleague, Katie O'Shea, had been working with how to work in the attachment period and even earlier, when we don't have picture memory and we don't have narrative memory about what happened. So she came up with an approach that allows us to modify EMDR in order to do that very early work. She and I collaborated because she wanted my expertise about the complex cases. So I spent a decade trying to sort out how you modify the early trauma approach in order to apply it to more complex cases. And I just published a book on that subject, 2017, Paulsen, and that one is When There Are No Words, Repairing Very Early Trauma in the, from the attachment period. And so there's a workshop by almost the same name that I give all around the world that is about working in implicit memory and in the attachment period and earlier. Now, I don't go so far as to say that I'm certain that we're always working in memory. Sometimes we might be working with mental construct, or I'm not sure what it is when we're talking about at the time of conception or the first trimester. But there's no doubt from research from our Italian colleagues and others that towards the end of gestation, babies are learning. And so the attachment period actually does seem to begin in gestation, and people have birth trauma. And so now we have a way to work with that using EMDR, even in the absence of picture memories or even narrative. I call it working with the dust bunnies that are in the body. The body tells us. One of my leading edge areas of interest is all the ways that the story tells itself when there are no words. And so we listen with our mirror neurons as the story emerges in the relationship field in the office. We listen to the enactments in the patient's life or in the therapeutic relationship because the story tells itself there. And there's much more to that. I've actually done I've got a few hours worth of teaching that I do on that subject of the myriad ways, verbal and nonverbal, that the story tells itself. So the third workshop is related to what I call the dust bunnies, that is, the nuances that are in the body. The reason, and that third workshop is called The Embodied Self, and it's about somatic methods that EMDR therapists need in order to really do a good job with people who may not be present in their bodies. If you try to do EMDR with someone who can't be embodied, it's not going to go anywhere, and it can be even re-traumatizing. And so somatic methods are important for people to learn how to be grounded and present in their body, how to be mindfully aware and track in a moment-to-moment way what's happening in their body. When we do somatic resourcing, it expands the window of tolerance so that people are able to tolerate emotions and body sensations better. And I mean both positive and negative emotions and body sensations. And it also gives people an introduction to metabolizing trauma that isn't as abreactive as EMDR can be. And so the somatic methods nibble around the edges of what's called the trauma vortex instead of diving full on. So it prepares people for doing full EMDR processing later on. And when I teach about somatic methods, when I teach with all these methods, I talk about how do you integrate it with the 8 phases of EMDR so that it's still EMDR, because we want to maintain the integrity of the protocol because that's where the research is. And I did a scholarly book called The Embodied Self with my colleagues Ulrich Lanius and Frank Corrigan. One's in Canada, one's in Scotland. And I'm beginning to work on another book that will include the somatic methods, but also spirituality and intuition. As it stands now, that book is going to incorporate all 3 of those things. And I think the name of that one's going to be Embodied Me, but it's a little early on that one. I'm also working on formalizing how you integrate the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder using EMDR, exposure and ritual prevention, and where needed ego state therapy. So those are all the things I have in the fire in the hopper right now.
Wow, busy lady. Well, I just want to thank you once again for sharing with us a little bit about what you're doing, and you're doing a lot, and you're always on the move. And once again, I thank you so much for coming to Brazil and teaching us, and that you're willing to go around the world and teach other people as well, because I think this is a very, very necessary part of learning how to deal with EMDR, because we do have different clients and they do need to have different ways of being treated and cared for. So thank you once again. I wish you the best of luck, and I look forward to seeing you and reading your books.
Thank you so much, Esly. See you later. Bye-bye.
See you.